Privileged to have Advocate Sabelo Sibanda from South Africa, whom some of you have seen in our previous programs. And we are discussing the concept of pan-Africanism. We are looking at pan-Africanism in the context of what has been happening in Africa, and particularly in recent months or in recent years, when we are facing different challenges which gave rise to the same notion or to the same concept of pan-Africanism. And to discuss the concept and the issues, I have, as I've told you, the privilege of having with us Advocate Sabelo Sibanda. Welcome to our studio.
Thank you very much.
We have Roy Sarungi, whom some of you have also seen in our programs. And last but not least, we have Professor Martha Koro, who is also a regular participant to our different programs. So I welcome you. Stay tuned. Concepts like Pan-Africanism are those notions that are beginning to fade and dissipate or disappear, but they're still struggling to exist, as we will hear from our panelists here. This is a concept that began in 1880-something. Those who remember, they remember the Chicago Conference in the USA, where there were advocates who were trying to internationalize the bond among black people who had faced different challenges, including slavery and other forms of tribulations. And we also remember the first London Conference of the first Pan-African Congress that took place in London. It was organized by a Trinidadian lawyer who suddenly died 11 years after. And we remember many other efforts that followed, involving intellectuals, scholars, artists, activists from across the globe. The aim was to actually bring together people of African descent, those who were abroad because of slavery or any other reason, and of course those who were still on the continent. How much Pan-Africanism succeeded, we will see during our discussion. Pan-Africanism, as I've said in my opening, was started by Africans themselves because they thought they had been dehumanized by the systems of the world, economic systems, trade systems like slavery, etc., etc. And Africans thought they needed to take action and change the situation. Probably Pan-Africanism contributed so much during the early years towards independence and also after independence. But how much Pan-Africanism is still relevant today, or how much Pan-Africanism is still active today, we will see during our discussions. We saw when Gaddafi was murdered, when the people of Libya were instigated by Western powers, somehow, somewhere, it's like Africans did not come together. Maybe these are the issues that we are also going to discuss. There are many other fundamental challenges that Africa faces, which also emanate from the same systems, the same old systems that have put Africa down, that have subjugated the people of Africa, politically, economically, culturally. So we will see what it is that Africa can do. But more specifically, we are going to focus on how Tanzania's president, John Pombe Magufuli, has reacted to the COVID pandemic, or how his government has rather reacted to the pandemic, and what Africans need to do to actually address these challenges that gave rise to the concept of Pan-Africanism. With that introduction, now I welcome my panelists to begin our discussions. I started in my introduction with the history. Advocate Sabelo, take us briefly through that beginning. because it will help us to see how, how relevant it still is, and what we need to do as Africans to make it more relevant.
Thank you very much. It is an honor, and indeed it is a pleasure to be here in Tanzania, talking about one of the core fundamentals of what it means and what it is to be an African today. The situation as regards Pan-Africanism is that from its inception right up to where we are now, it has been a core tool by which to advance ourselves as African people, where on one hand we are looking at the unity of the global African nation. And the whole idea behind Pan-Africanism has been also to redefine the concept of nationhood, where in the past, during the process of enslavement and after the Berlin Conference, the whole idea was to break Africans into different little groupings and get them to identify primarily along the lines of the colonial boundaries. But in its inception, Pan-Africanism comes in and says, let's not look at each other according to these small little groupings that have been imposed upon us. We are actually a bigger entity than we've been made to believe, which is why the 1900 Congress under Sylvester Williams comes up, and amongst the resolutions of that particular Congress was the fact that from here on, we want the world to begin to recognize us as Africans. And basically pushing a scenario where it's even saying to the colonizers that we as African people deserve the right to be recognized as a people. So the whole drive towards this Pan-Africanist ideology, in as much as it had started mainly in articulation by intellectuals, it came to a point where, particularly under the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, it became a people's movement. So what happens is that it starts off as primarily an ideological concept, and it becomes a way by which to ventilate who we are as African people. And then now comes Garvey, who says, let's practicalize the application of what Pan-Africanism is and what it means to us as a people. Hence the reason why the creation of UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, which was started by Marcus Garvey, which to this day is still the biggest ever Pan-Africanist movement that there ever was, which attracted a membership of more than 6 million people. With the publication, there was no telephone, there was no fax, there was no WhatsApp, no Telegram, no emails, but the Negro World, which was the publication issued by UNIA, was able to reach the outermost parts of the world, including Southern Africa, including China. Partly, Chairman Mao, they accept that the influences of Garvey actually informed the Chinese Revolution.
But you put that history very well, and of course there are those who would criticize Garvey that he put himself so much on the front, someone who was going to be the president and all that, and thereby losing some friends or supporters. But I wanted to ask you whether there's a paradox in the fact that the Pan-African movement was so much a creation, something that was started by the hunger, the thirsty of diasporians, rather than Africans on the ground, until much later when the Nyereres and Nkrumahs and others joined in. I mean, is that by itself a factor in the strength of Pan-Africanism in Africa?
It's not a factor if being a factor would mean demeaning its relevance. All that happened is that if you look at the dynamics at the time, the exposure in as far as academic materials which informed people more about the realities of what was happening and the ability to communicate was more in the West than it was on the continent. And the ability to organize in the manner that the diasporans did was more effective in the West than it was on the continent. But the most important and most critical thing is this whole aspect of diasporans versus continental Africans, which is why we talk about the reclassification of a nation. When we talk about the global African nation, it doesn't matter who has started it. For instance, now we are in a situation within the continent of Africa where we need a drive by which to re-energize pan-Africanism, where we need to re-energize our identity as African people. And President Magufuli happens to be the person who has responded and is taking us forward in that particular aspect in a practical manner. Right. The Tanzanian nation is the nation that is basically coming up and saying, Africa, this is what is happening. Rise up, let us move together. So we cannot sit back in the South and say, no, 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 they started in the East. We will wait until we can raise a South African and then we will follow. Otherwise, we will defeat the whole notion of what Pan-Africanism really stands for and what Pan-Africanism represents. And which is why I talk about Gavi. And yes, admitted, Gavi had his own mistakes. But the most important thing is that he created a strong movement and he got people to begin to take pride in their Africanness.
And by the way, it was the first time, as you said, Sabelo, at the beginning, it kind of drew together more of intellectuals and activists, and probably it lacked, you know, something on the roots,
grassroots,
on the ground. Yes, exactly. But Gavi did something to turn that around.
Absolutely, absolutely. He really energized the grassroots. He got the ordinary African to begin to take pride in the fact that I am an African.
Absolutely.
And if you notice, it was at that time as well that even entities within the United States who used to call themselves Negro, in as much as it started off with the Universal Negro Improvement Association, with time they began to consciously call themselves African. When they create something, it was African this, African this, and you see it even within the church setting, where you have now churches referring to themselves as African. So it began to work on the mindset. And this is one of the things that Gavi did, which unfortunately we find ourselves having to do again to work on the mindset of the African. Because the battle that we are caught with at the moment is the battle for the African mind and the African heart. Because our minds are locked in Europe and we're walking around on the continent.
That's a very strong point, Advocate Sabelo. And I'll come back to you. And I go straight to Professor Martha Koro. I saw her agree with you on that note, because I know she's been, you know, an avid advocate of, you know, the use of Kiswahili. That's one aspect of liberation. She's been an ardent supporter for many years, actually, the use of Kiswahili from primary schools, secondary schools to university level. And the counter arguments, some of them are quite superfluous, you know, with due respect. Yet she has persistently, together with others, and unfortunately you are the minority. And it is quite mind-boggling to see that you are, in fact, there wasn't even supposed to be advocacy for our use of Kiswahili. You know, it's like I'm advocating for my being present, for my being me. You know, it's strange. So please, you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yoba and Advocate Sabelo. I must admit I'm not a specialist in this area of
I know. The reason I invited you,
But
Professor,
yes.
is what you've been doing practically, actually.
Okay,
It's
thank you.
Pan-African.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I
Yes.
really, I like pan-Africanism, and I think this is what should have been going on, and we should have moved quite far by now. Unfortunately, we are stuck. And not only stuck, I think somehow we are disintegrating. And I think we need to ask ourselves why. Why are we in this position? Because normally, if something is supposed to make progress, and there is some effort put into it, and then you don't see results, I think we need then at that point to find out why. Why are we not moving? And I think we have, there are certain things that we should have taken into account, which I think we never did. For example, you thought of, or you were talking about the 1884 conference, when we were divided into smaller countries, yes, entities, and each one of them being colonized by a different power, and therefore using a different language that is keeping us separate. Because our coming together as Africa would not be safe for those who want to keep us apart.
Absolutely.
Okay, it's kind of divide and rule. Okay, so I think this is a factor that we haven't been considering in the equation. And because we haven't been considering that, we never took that seriously. It's like we are fighting a battle and we don't know the kind of opposition we are fighting, or you know, the factors against which we have to work. I think that is one of the problems, because we assume that if we talk about it, if we tell our youth about it, then it's going to work. But it won't, because in the first place we were divided for a purpose. You know, we became these little entities for a purpose. And those people, the purpose for which they did during those days are still valid today.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
So they are there, but we are not thinking about that.
In fact, you mentioned our President Magufuli. He has done he has taken a number of steps, you know, towards the direction Professor is actually addressing here. For example, the use of Kiswahili. Now, Kiswahili will be among the languages to be used in our regional bodies when they meet in their meetings. It's an official language. However, but recently there was something interesting. Here, for us, I mean, it's strange. I mean, in other countries we can understand, if it's in Zimbabwe or other countries. But here in Tanzania, we've had Kiswahili since independence. Yet, in courts, you know, decisions are made, judgments are made and written in English. And recently, our president actually, you know, promoted the use of Kiswahili. Not forcing them anyway, but the way he did it, steps are now being taken to see to it that we can begin to write our judgments in Kiswahili. You know, you are writing a judgment on a case concerning someone who doesn't even understand that English.
Absolutely.
So, Roy, you want to come
I
in?
was recently watching your CJ, Chief Justice, the landed Chief Justice, Mawang, that's the way you pronounce that name in South Africa.
Yeah.
That is an African by making. If you go through some of his few remarks that he has been making.
Yes.
Recently he was talking about the vaccination on COVID-19.
Absolutely.
And he was very categorical that if this vaccination is coming to interfere with human genes, then I regard this as satanic vaccine 666. To the concept, at times we behave like delinquents. As a learned counsel, I think you understand what I'm saying.
Yes.
We behave like delinquents in this area of pan-Africanism, in that we are not speaking in the same language. First of all, we must agree, and it will not going to change, that we were ruled by various colonial entities. Some were ruled by the French, others by the Portuguese, others by English individuals. Colonialism is gone. But our disparities and our differences are still there. It is absolutely shocking until today. Recently, we had a trade agreement that I think you went through it, that which was signed in Kigali, Rwanda in 2018. which was signed by every member state of Africa, Eritrea objected, saying that they still perceive this notion of Pan-Africanism bringing Africa together is a fallacy. They are much contemplating to put in much of their national energy on regional development blocks rather than continental issues. I'm just trying to address...
And it's the same old argument still coming back.
Yes.
Yeah, where there were politicians during the 60s who believed that we could start African unity with regional integration.
Yes.
And there are others who believed that no, like Nkrumah.
Yes.
He said, no, let's start at once with
now,
one Africa.
COVID has come, and this has been a litmus test to so many African nations. Because while other African leaders were going through a coastal sense of motion, trying to think as to how they're going to get their respective countries out of the pandemic, the continent didn't show up a proper direction. It is President Magufuli who said, are we supposed to put our subjects to lockdown? That's the question. Which he was not only talking to his subject in Tanzania, but rather the whole continent. The second thing, if we are going to subject them to lockdown, where are we going to get the auxiliary budgets to facilitate their day-to-day activities while at home?
In a situation where we don't know when this
thing is going
to go away.
True.
And then, when it came to issues of masks, if I'm not mistaken, your incumbent president, Cyril Ramaphosa, has been at a very big loggerheads with the incumbent CJ because of this issue of COVID.
Yeah.
Because Ramaphosa was among the few first African head of state to put South Africa into lockdown, to allow masks without proper screening, with a proper knowledge, knowing exactly well that there are almost over 10 million masks fake, which have been intercepted in America. And South Africa is a very small economy vis-a-vis if you compare to America.
Yeah.
And then South Africa is among the few African countries which have decided to welcome in Pfizer, Moderna, without even proper medical analogy from medical experts in South Africa. Now, as to when the DG is trying to raise the issue of Magufuli as a flying example to Africa, what the message being sent home is that you might wonder, this is a pandemic which was first politicized by WHO because it broke out in China towards the end of 2019. China had the information, they kept it secret. Well, the Wuhan officials, on their best way means, they leaked it to Taiwan. Taiwan contacted WHO. WHO was not prepared to act because Taiwan is not an independent state. It's still being regarded as part of China. Now, those issues in between, the flip-flops in the international community, we Africans were supposed to come together and say, look, this is a pandemic. How are we going to address it? Do we put our people at lockdown? Yes. Will we allow for vaccine? Yes. But where does this disease come from? No African leader has been bold enough to question even the source of this disease. You see how, well, with the concept of Pan-Africanism, I'm just trying to create a line here, towing a line to prove how divided we are. This disease has exactly exposed us to show how vulnerable we are. And thank God.
In fact, Roy, you are raising a very important issue, the issue of we being critical, we questioning. You know, instead of receiving everything, every order that we are given by the master, that we have to be critical.
We have to question.
Because already we have seen exigencies surrounding, the whole COVID-19 hullabaloo. We have seen raging war even now, between and among scientists. Scientists themselves, they don't agree on a number of issues. We have seen exposures, people coming out to expose some of what they consider to be, abnormal conduct by other scientists. We have seen profiteers. This whole there's business involved. You know,
Yes.
one interesting thing is how possible was it that these guys came up with the vaccine almost at the same time? You know, different countries on different continents.
Yeah, before I get
Roy, had you finished your point?
No, I had not finished.
Please
my point.
finish.
There's something I was just trying to
No,
address.
if you have a different point,
There's
she
something
could come in and then you'll
okay.
proceed. Yes.
There's
Yes,
something unfortunately I didn't agree with it when he said colonialism is gone. I believe it's not gone. It's always been here. And before they left, they made sure they leave behind a system that works for them in their absence. And that system is just as efficient as if they were still here. So they haven't left. They are still here. They are still working. You can look at the education system. Look at what is being taught to our children, what we have been taught. We have been fed, looking at Africa through the European eyes.
Yes.
This is what has been happening, and this is what is happening up to today.
Yeah.
So we are like running a system for them, for their benefit.
Yeah. You'll be
But we are paying the price.
Can I give a rebuttal on that
So
issue?
No,
maybe we
before
can
you
go to that.
rebut-
But
Before you rebut, can I just add on to what Professor Goro is saying? We are caught in a situation where one of the biggest liabilities for us as African people, we celebrated flag independence and took on board the colonial institutions that were in place with hardly any tampering. The legal justice system for one, the education, the health, the defense. We took everything in total to a point where you find even our presidents at the time celebrating that now they can be in the State House. And for some it became the ultimate victory. And the coloniality has continued to a point where the fact that the colonization was by the English, the French, the Portuguese, etc., there are some people to this day and age who will sit there and proudly say, I am Anglophone. The next one will say, I am Francophone. That's why I always argue that I am phony nothing. I'm an African.
But Advocate Sabelo, what you're saying is what I encountered about 2 years ago. I was attending a meeting in one of these African countries where, you know, this meeting brought together people from French-speaking countries and English-speaking countries. Of course, they forgot that you have other something-speaking countries.
Yes.
And when I tried to speak in Kiswahili, you know, someone attacked me, saying, no. Here it's either English or French. And I asked them, why? Why should we perpetuate this colonial mentality? That if I speak a language originating from Africa, then I'm disrupting the meeting.
Yeah, you are seen as a lesser being.
Yeah.
Because you have taken onto board identity.
Yeah.
And colonialism will begin to end for us as African people when we can actually reclaim our identity.
Yes.
It's a personal thing that has to happen. There has to be this rupture within the individual. It's actually a rebellion to come to that point of... I'll
come back to you, Roy. I know you have unfinished
African.
point, but let me still go with what Advocate is saying. I want to add something to what you're saying so that you take it further. Because we have seen, I mean, we had efforts made by many post-independence leaders in Africa to make sure they right the wrong. And for instance, in terms of culture, that we focus on our own culture, we promote our own culture, we promote our own ways of looking at things, at reality. That we don't become these people whose reality is defined by others, and particularly those who colonized them.
Yes.
Now, but a lot has happened in the preceding years. Politically, we have seen liberal politics coming in. We've seen free market fundamentals operating, and well, I'm not saying that free markets are bad, but what I'm saying is they are not good completely either. They do have certain things, or they come along with certain things that probably aren't that beneficial to us as Africans. And of course, we have technology, a very good thing, but it can also be used negatively against our own interest, for example, cultural interests, and a lot of other things. Why don't we question ourselves? TBC can only be watched here in Tanzania, and probably because of technology, it can go outside. But why is it that we have TVs from those big countries, especially those who colonized others? Of course, recently China is also coming up. Why do we have those TV all over the world? What do you think they are doing? They are spreading their ideas to us.
Absolutely.
So my question is, in that kind of situation, and given the fact we do also have education system which is now quite, I don't know how to call it, it's a mixture where you have private schools which can have a distinct curricula where what is taught is like you are teaching a child from Europe or you're teaching a child from the US and not necessarily here. So in that kind of society, how do you address these challenges that we are addressing here now?
The most critical thing, Dr. Rioba, is that like what Brother Roy was saying earlier about asking questions, the quality of life that we lead is directly related to the quality of the questions that we ask.
I like that quotation.
Yes, if we ask meaningless questions, we will get meaningless answers and have a meaningless life. But if we begin to ask questions that really matter, then we will begin to move forward.
Right.
Why is it that we are now having so many private schools coming up or consolidated? Because the nature of the miseducation that we have been subjected to has told us that Western education is better. That is why you find that a lot of our people will sacrifice to make sure that their children go through these private schools so that they can have an opportunity to go to America, go to the UK, go to wherever. How many of our people really take their children to school with the view in mind that says, once you qualify, you will be of benefit to Tanzania. You will be of benefit to Africa. And one of the reasons why that question is never asked is because the school system itself is designed in such a manner that when I go to school not necessarily to advance my community, but to get qualifications which will make me relevant for someone else.
Yes.
Exactly.
Which is why you find that much of the time, unless I really have to, I don't like to talk about my qualifications. Because
no, you are free to do that if that helps the
if
discussions.
it's necessary for the discussion, definitely. But you find that where we do it, I'll go to the village now. And I have to introduce myself. Next thing I'm saying I'm advocate and thinking, okay, what's the relevance of that now?
In the village.
But,
but you could probably get someone in the village who needs an advocate.
That is possible. But the tendency is that when we do that, we do it for purposes of intimidation. We intimidate our own people using this endorsement which is foreign in itself, which is an endorsement which is of little relevance to the people in the village. So now you find that that in itself takes us away from our Africanness. It takes us away from our community spirit. Yes, we do need these qualifications for purposes of taking ourselves forward, but the qualifications must not override our humanity, must not override our relevance to our African communities. One of the reasons why, sadly, Africa is where it is right now, it's not because of the ordinary people whom we call uneducated and illiterate. It's because of those of us who have been miseducated and diseducated and now want to be better than those people and want to portray ourselves as though we are competing with the West to be more Western than the West, as against portraying ourselves to be relevant to our own Africanness. Which is why you'll find that the people who are attacking President Magufuli right now, it's not so much the ordinary people on the street.
Absolutely.
It's the so-called educated people.
The elites.
They are the elites who are the ones at the forefront without any science to put on the table, but simply because they have a qualification which is imposed upon the people after being recognized and endorsed by the West, then they come and say they are speaking something that makes sense. And push someone like President Magufuli into a corner as if to say, oh, you're just speaking commoners' language. We don't hear what you are saying because Dr. So-and-so from France has said. So that is where everything goes wrong, and this is where our pan-Africanism has gotten to a point where it is right now. We as Pan-Africanists are also responsible for the demise of Pan-Africanism. We have failed to be relevant to an ideology which is most relevant to the advancement of African people. Our people will rise as long as we can actually get Pan-Africanism accessible to the people. As long as Pan-Africanism ends up or stays as something for the elites to sit down and debate and have whiskey over, it's of no use to anyone. It's about the institutions, and which is one of the reasons why, from a Pan-Africanist perspective, we are looking at Tanzania with so much interest. Because what we are saying is, with everything that President Magufuli is doing in Tanzania, what institutions can we begin to build around this? How do we institutionalize what is happening to a point that even beyond President Magufuli, we know that the future is secure? It must not start with him and end with him. He is continuing on a race which was started by others. It broke down along the way, and he has come up and is championing that particular cause. But let's not make the same mistake we have made with the others who champion the cause. We let them be knocked down, everything falls apart until we wait for someone else. But in this particular instance, the whole idea is to say, okay, what is the broad nature of this ideology? How do we take it and say, okay, what President Magufuli is saying now, this is speaking to our health. This is speaking like even his policies on non-GMO. That is critical. He's speaking to our food. He's speaking to our diet. How do we consolidate our agriculture? How do we as African people begin to be a people who actually feed themselves? Because at the moment, we are at everyone's mercy. We are being fed by other people. Yet Africa has more than 60% of the arable land of the world. What are we doing with it? In actual fact, you find that they are coming to grow their crops in Africa and export them outside. And we on the continent receive the chaff that has now been interfered with, and we feed ourselves. So what President Magufuli is therefore saying is, let's revisit how we deal with our ability to feed ourselves. In revisiting our ability to feed ourselves, we are therefore saying, let's revisit our agricultural processes. How do we maximize on our agriculture without compromising the quality of the food? And that becomes highly, highly critical. If we don't look at that, then we'll have a problem. And what President Magufuli is saying is, here is the aspect pertaining to education. How do we educate ourselves when these things come about? Because as African people right now, we are in a scenario where we have this disease, and for some of our people, the question is, when are we going to get the vaccine? Who is going to give us it? Where are we getting the money for the vaccine? What are we going to do? Oh my God, if we all die. But President Magufuli is saying,
don't panic.
Just wait. Let's have a look at this thing properly. What exactly is it that we are dealing with here? Is it something man-made? Is it something natural? This test that we have, let's look at it carefully. Is it really testing what it is supposed to test? And then it does his experiment. which throws the whole testing world upside down when a popo tests positive, when a goat tests positive, because he's asking the right questions. That is why he's getting the right answers, that this thing is actually wrong. After he did that, 22 scientists from different parts of the world actually went into that Conan-Drosten PCR and tested it themselves, came up with 10 fundamental flaws. And said this thing must be discredited.
Proving what had been done by Tanzania.
What they did, they proved what had been done by President Magufuli,
Exactly.
and actually gave it a scientific foundation now. And say, here is a study.
Yes.
This is what we have done. And over and above that, one of the critical things about that, one of the major flaws that they identified is that we know that coronavirus is nothing new. COVID-19 is supposed to be as a result of SARS-CoV-2, which is another strain of coronavirus. The test that is being used, the setting of the test was based on an ordinary coronavirus, yet it's supposed to be testing for SARS-CoV-2. How will you catch CoV-2 if the basic testing parameter is an ordinary coronavirus? You will never catch it because that's not what the test is looking for.
Sabelo, you're talking about either our capacity or willingness to question or to ask the right questions. I mean, do you see this happening in Africa? I mean, well, it has happened in Tanzania. Which other countries it is happening?
Well, Zambia, it has happened.
Yes.
The opposition leader, Dr. Nevas Mumba,
Yes.
he is basically...
Oh, yeah, I have seen a clip of
Yes,
him.
yes.
Yeah.
Mumba took a position that basically says, before we as Zambians can accept this vaccine, we first of all have to find out as to where it's coming from and why it is that is being sent to us. And question further, one of the core fundamentals of his questioning was, why is it that this box on the vaccine that contains the vaccine actually states clearly and categorically, this vaccine is not for use in the United States, not for use in Canada, not for use in the European Union, and then gives a list of African countries. It can only be used in, and we don't ask the question. So it doesn't make sense. So he started asking the question till he said, we have to be fools to take this thing without questioning it. We need our own scientists to test this and tell us that it really works for us. So they took the same position that President Magufuli had taken, and they started asking questions in the same manner that President Magufuli had started asking questions, because President Magufuli did not deny that people are dying. The question was, what are they dying of? And is this test that we are being expected to test in reality the thing that will give us the results that we need?
Right.
For example, I'll take this from the top of my head. There is a lab. I'm not going to mention the country and I'm not going to mention the name of the lab. When they do their test and they give you the result, it will state for the negative that you are negative because the SARS-CoV-2 RNA has not been detected. And then it will go on to explain what not detected means. It says not detected means that the test is negative, meaning that the sample that we tested did not find the SARS-CoV-2 RNA. The next sentence, immediately after that, it says, however, this does not rule out the possibility of COVID-19. And then proceeds further to say, this may not be used for patient case management. So what exactly are you saying? If you are telling the world that SARS-CoV-2 is responsible for COVID-19, and you are saying this person does not have SARS-CoV-2, but you are not ruling out the possibility of the person having COVID-19, and you are not saying, therefore, that if a doctor had to attend to this person, they should rely on this result. So what purpose does it serve? So these are the questions that President Magufuli has been throwing to the world, which is why I talk about the quality of the question. the quality of the questions that he has been asking are the questions that we should all be asking, are the questions that, as African people today, being told that we should vaccinate our people, we should be asking these questions. For instance, how does it happen that this thing was supposed, when it came up, said we were told that it's associated with winter. But now you have a situation where in some countries it's hot now, but they're also still having cases. In some countries it's cold, they're still having cases. In some countries from the time it started up to now it's still there. So are we really dealing with something that is genuinely natural?
Or something which is scientifically understood.
Absolutely. And that is
universally.
Absolutely.
The same way.
Those are the questions we should be asking ourselves.
That's a very interesting...
Why are we not asking the questions?
Sorry?
He's saying
exactly,
we are not asking the questions.
Yes.
I think that's where we should also look at.
Yeah.
Why are we not asking the right questions?
Yeah.
Because our training, you know, the way we live, the way we have been schooled, we are not supposed to be asked questions.
The right questions, especially.
You are not supposed to be asking questions. You are supposed to absorb like a sponge, you know, the knowledge that you are being told. And why it's not said, that's not put in, it's not put up clearly, but it's done, you know, it's done that you shouldn't be asking questions. Because if they teach you in a language you don't understand, would you ask a question? You don't understand in the first place. So most of the time in Tanzania, you'll find students will say, mwalimu wezoza tu maswali noma. And just go on.
Just teach.
You know, just go on teaching because, you know, you are not supposed to be asking questions. Because the thing is, most of our students don't understand what is taught. From the first year of secondary school, sometimes up to university.
Wow.
I've been teaching in secondary schools before I joined the University of Dar es Salaam. So this problem, the language problem, is one factor that our young people, or even those who've been through this system, very few of them are able to ask questions, maybe because they were able to go elsewhere. But there is a fundamental problem in education, and as we said, most of these systems that we inherited from our colonial masters, the legal, the educational, the political, the economic, all of them. So those are working, and while they're still there, it's not possible to bring up people who are capable of asking the right questions. And I think that is where we should actually start.
Yeah,
why are we here? How did we get here? How can we get out of this situation? Because when we talk about pan-Africanism, I think that is maybe a higher level, but there are basics that we need to address before we get to that
Professor,
stage.
the basics that you are talking about, Sabero and I, before we came here, we were discussing the concept of Ubuntu. Before I came to TBC, I was teaching at the university, journalism courses, so I was teaching ethics. That's my area of specialty. And so I understand the concept of Ubuntu. And I want to go back to something that Roy touched earlier, but expand on that, because I would like to see the discussion is more about Pan-Africanism. Yes, we have narrowed it somewhere to COVID-19, but I just wanted to go around other issues which Magufuli's leadership is actually responding to Pan-African cry, long-time cry that we have to do this, let's do this. And you've mentioned the response to COVID-19, and we will still discuss. I'm told we have a scientist in Studio 2. He will probably respond about the local remedies that the government has encouraged us to use. We have different institutions that have responded swiftly to actually produce different remedies to COVID-19 and probably other ailments, and it has taught us a lesson that we have the capacity to do some of these things. But there are other areas, for example.
Before I proceed, I think there was something which I was supposed to add.
That is true.
That was to rebut. You've got me across. What I'm trying to say is, you know, it is something which is unrefutable, undisputed, and it's very vivid, that Ethiopia, the Abyssinia, and Liberia are not colonized. You see where we Africans are missing the shot.
Sure.
And then you'll see there's something somewhere wrong. Tanzania, Tanganyika, Zanzibar, Kenya, Uganda, they were all colonized. Even South Africa. And South Africa just received, I think your independence is not even 40 years old now.
Yeah, 94.
Yes. Now, the scenario is, you can ask yourself, a country like Ethiopia, which was not colonized, a country like Liberia, which was not colonized, and Liberia was lucky enough to have received from abroad fellow black men and women who had worked in plantations.
Liberia is a country where blacks were resettled in 1816.
Yes, meaning they had some knowledge.
Yeah.
But okay, okay, my friend, let me not interject. I'll wait
they
for you
came back after working in industries, even as cheap laborers, and in farms, meaning they came with certain input which local natives did not have at that time. Because they, in spite of the fact that they went abroad to work and they were brought home to constitute that new independent country, they came with a knowledge or an understanding which other African people who remained in Africa never got. But until today, these two countries which were never colonized have major big problems, more than even South Africa, which was under colonial rule almost until early 90s. What am I trying to put home?
Yeah, that's what I'm interested to know, what the argument is.
The argument is,
The issue colonialism is not an issue. It's not a factor.
the argument is whether we were colonized or we were not colonized. I always anticipate that we should move ahead of that discussion. My point is, because Tanganyika was colonized, Ethiopia wasn't. In Ethiopia today, there's a civil war. What am I, are you really getting my point?
I am, my brother, and sorry, Dr. Yoba, if I can just respond to this.
Yes.
The issue with Liberia, we also have to be clear that these Africans who took occupation were part of a project, the America Colonization Society. So it was a process of having identified Africans who were going to be of little relevance to the development of Liberia in the manner that they wanted. That is why Garvey was blocked from sending people to Liberia, because they knew that Marcus Garvey will go there with a totally different perspective and a different idea, and therefore a different outcome from the anticipated outcome. But the America Colonization Society identified these people to go and occupy and therefore push the agenda. And my brother, the whole idea, I hear what you are saying about Ethiopia, but let's not also rule out the impact of the Cold War on Ethiopia. You remember that there was a time where there was the Americans and the Russians literally playing a game in Ethiopia. So colonization and coloniality generally is not necessarily about the settlers coming in and taking over your government and settling, but it's also about their systems being used to destabilize those particular nations. If Ethiopia had been left to its own whims and its own systems, its own culture, and its own direction, without the influence of either the Russians or the Americans, they would be somewhere far by now. One of the reasons why they are fighting is that they are still fighting as a result of the impact of the Cold War. So you're right that they were not colonized in the same manner that we're talking about, but the truth of the matter is that their systems of governance and now even their economic policies are being imposed upon. Absolutely. And this is why we're saying that the issue of coloniality vis-a-vis pan-Africanism has to be informed by replacing a system of oppression with a system that advances our Africanness. The mistake that we made was this belief that because now we have an African president sitting in office, we are therefore independent. We did not differentiate the difference between sitting in office and having power. We've got so many presidents sitting in an office, but they don't have any power.
I know that.
Yeah, that is where everything went wrong. And that is where the situation with Liberia and Ethiopia also went wrong.
Now, can I proceed with my point?
Please do, my brother.
Yeah, before you ask it, because you came in before I had set up my question. I just wanted us to direct ourselves to, the topic today, Pan-Africanism in the context of the challenges we are facing and how we respond to the challenges. Actually, not only COVID-19, but several other challenges, like we have seen here in Tanzania. So please, anyone who
we are running the entire debate at the time when there's a pandemic.
True.
And all eyes. This has become a very thorny political issue in Africa, if I'm not mistaken.
That is true.
I was recently seeing the EFF boss, Julius Malema, running loose in parliament. So it's a thorny political issue, and Tanzania is not in isolation.
Yeah.
We have been seeing people throwing tantrums against the ruling party and the President Magufuli. But there's something based on that same theme and thesis of Pan-Africanism. On January, that was January 14th, 2020, mid-noon, that's at 18 minutes past noon, the director of World Health Organization in Geneva tweeted saying that although there is an outbreak of a severe pneumonia in China, that is in Wuhan, there is no evidence, medical, scientific evidence, to establish that that virus can undergo human-to-human transfer. That was 3 weeks since when Dr. Lee raised that issue of whistleblowing, if you can recall. Today, African leaders and African citizens, whether divided or united, are held in a quagmire or in a certain corner. The director of World Health Organization did not end it there. He also instructed, if not advised, the world not to subject China into trade and travel restrictions.
True.
But this is a matter which Taiwan had raised with WHO 3 weeks ago. Should WHO have acted?
WHO meaning the World Health Organization, yes.
So as the director of World Health Organization to declare that coronavirus is now a pandemic, he had to travel to China. I think you have the chronology of all the events. Why did this happen? Because if it could have been established from the onset that coronavirus broke from China and SARS started there in 2003, then nobody could have been interested to do business or to travel in China. So somebody somewhere had to defend China at all costs. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
Now, these are some of the things which is pushing Tanzania under the ousted stewardship of President Magufuli to ask very, very intricate but straightforward question. Where did this disease come from? How did it start? Was it from a seafood market or where?
Was it from a laboratory?
Yeah, or from a laboratory. Well, it started in Wuhan. How did it end in Kibera slums in Nairobi, in Soweto, in South Africa, in Manzese in Dar es Salaam?
In fact, what they're saying, you rightly pointed out in your submission that normally the virus have a tendency to have a particular behavior.
Yes.
But this one acts strangely.
Yeah,
You'll find it
true.
in winter, you'll find it in summer, you'll find it in the north, you'll find it in the south. And the only difference, of course, is that it spits more fire in some countries than in others. Yeah.
Then there's a certain situation. Another situation is of lockdowns. This is something which Tanzania has greatly been insulted internationally. And I think you have been hearing this while in South Africa.
Very much, yeah.
But while our president decided not to subject his subjects into a lockdown, you South Africans went to lockdown.
Full time.
Under the order of Cyril Ramaphosa. Even under the supervision of the military. He had to act as the commander-in-chief to call in the army to preside over the curfew and the lockdowns.
Yes, that's true.
Now, look at, our president was just trying to watch. Why are these countries, even in Europe, where they have imposed lockdowns? In Texas, in London, in Netherlands, why are people refusing to stay at home? People are refusing, people are demonstrating. Right now there are demonstrations going in some parts of Western world against lockdown. Pfizer and Moderna have taken the vaccine to Israel, the Holy Land.
Yeah.
Among those people who have been vaccinated, 12 million after the second jab have tested positive.
Yeah.
These are the things which is, you know, by bad luck or by good luck, is that our president was a former chemistry and mathematics teacher while in secondary school. So he's not a lawyer like you. So when you bring in science issues, he has to assess them in a scientific point of view as a teacher.
Absolutely.
We have a president who is a scientist. So he's trying to ask himself very difficult questions before pushing his country into darkness, because you want us to put on masks. You saw this situation in South Africa. People putting on 3 layers of mask. 3, not 1, 3. Now you ask yourself, what is this person protecting himself from?
Sure.
3 layers of mask. That was another issue. Another issue is the people who are putting on masks are still testing positive. What is the reason? Why?
And the other thing is, even the putting on of masks has its own protocols.
Yes.
You cannot put on the same mask the whole day.
Yes, you have to
keep changing them.
And that's
again, even the manner in which you put it
Yes.
on. You know, some people would pull it down.
Yes.
And then return
Yes.
it up, you know, thereby contaminating the same. So even the issue of wearing masks itself is quite tricky. But probably, Roy, before you proceed, I go to studio number 2 and meet Dr. Paul Kaziobia. Dr. Paul, I would like you to respond to the issues we have discussed regarding COVID-19, but kindly respond to the masks issue, vaccine issue, but also the local remedies that even NIMRI, the institution you represent here, has actually developed a local remedy.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Arioba. I think I should, including what you have just asked me to respond to. Let me begin by responding to a question by Professor Koro. Why are we not asking a question? And from my response here, then you get to understand better all the responses to the issues which were raised in the discussion. COVID-19, when you look at it very closely, it has a huge element of some sort of business. And what happened during the heated, during the spikes of the cases early last year, it was now the giants dictating on how the young or the weak should respond. And the Western adopted a system called the top-down approach. And you can see only very few countries in the world decided to go against that. And one of the countries is Tanzania. Tanzania, from the onset, from the 16th March 2020 last year when the first case was announced, we adopted the bottom-up approach. And the bottom-up approach allows the government, or the people rather, to also internalize the problem, understand the problem, and contribute to the response. They should also be part of the solution-seeking mission, and that's what we did in Tanzania. So when the president brought into the equation the issues of religion, people should fast and pray for 3 days. He brought into the equation traditional medicine, all sorts of possible solutions to the problem. That attests to what we call the bottom-up approach.
I think you are bringing in a very significant point, that there has been throughout the pandemic, this top-down approach where
Yeah.
people are given orders
Yeah.
what to do and what not to do.
Absolutely.
But the fact that in Tanzania, because people were involved, in different levels and different ways, and that's why even last year we saw the response from the ordinary people was quite overwhelming. It
Yeah.
was enormous. I
Yeah.
mean, the response towards measures to protect themselves.
Yes. And thank you, Ryoba. And even the lockdown, my brother Sarungi has spoken about. The lockdown agenda was actually dictated from the top. That's why the WHO was so much furious with Tanzania, why Tanzania is not adopting the globally advocated preventive approaches. Now, to understand these matters, every time there is an emergency, the best strategy is to understand the emergency and contextualize the approach to which will help you overcome or fight the emergency. So in Tanzania, the president adopted the bottom-up. Everyone has to play a role in the fight against COVID-19. That is the time when traditional medicine was brought into on the table. Religious people were also involved. And we as NIMRI, we had to work very hard to develop something that will contribute in the fight against COVID-19. And at the time we formulated the NIMRI-CAF. And NIMRI-CAF is so famous in Tanzania, people are using it until today. And we know how the formula is helping our brothers and sisters to fight a disease. Now, if you are to benefit from the indigenous knowledge, you have to promote it. Because those guys who know these stuffs, the traditional medicine, the herbs, most of them have very low education, or probably they've gone up to mid-level. Although these days we have graduates who have the knowledge of traditional medicine. So when the government speaks openly that we want to see traditional medicine coming at the front in the fight against this outbreak, that's one of the best and strong gestures to promote indigenous knowledge. And I should say at this point, when we speak of pan-africanism, initially, pan-Africanism was seen like a political vehicle for Africans to rule themselves in totality. But then somehow, we forgot some of our very, very precious aspects of Africanism, the indigenous knowledge. We even forget that the indigenous knowledge we have in Africa is the one which has been fueling drug discovery in the West. Even as we speak, there is a lot of knowledge which is being stolen from Africa to fuel technology development in the West, especially in the areas of medicine. So as we discuss pan-Africanism in the era of COVID-19, we should not forget our knowledge base, which is very wealthy and lying in our communities. So in Tanzania, we have played our part, and I should congratulate my very, very loved President, John Magufuli, for standing for the country and for believing in Africa. Every time he has spoken, the West was so much troubled by the utterances. But for the people who understand the contextual issues, I believe they stayed calm up until what was spoken probably 2 weeks ago was realized later in about a month or 3 weeks next. So as a proponent of Africanism and as somebody who believes in our own capacity, Africa and my own country has to continue working hard to develop our own solutions going forward. And this won't remove us from the global world. No, we will live with everybody else in the world, but we have to cherish our own knowledge and pump resources to make sure that it contributes in the fight against diseases. Gone are the days when the thinking of an African has to depend from the West. And I must be honest with you, brothers and sisters. Number one enemy of an Africa and number one enemy of pan-Africanism is not the West. It is we land people from Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've made a very strong point there, Dr. Kazioba, with regards to pan-Africanism. You know, I thought you being a medical doctor would probably not be interested in, but you have put it very, very nicely. By the way, actually putting emphasis on the point that we have local knowledge, we have local remedies, but our minds are captured, and they cannot relate to what is on the ground. We cannot throw the bucket just below your feet. I have two quotations that I wanted to share with my viewers. These are from a well-known poet, Black American poet, intellectual. His name is James Arthur Baldwin. I quote the first one. He said, "The victim who is able to articulate the situation of the victim has ceased to be a victim. He or she has become a threat."
Yeah.
So what Tanzania is doing is to actually articulate the situation, and therefore we cease to become victims, and probably we end up becoming a threat to some interests. But the other quotation I wanted to share with you, which is pertinent, is that the place in which I will fit will not exist until I make it. Which means as Africans, we cannot continue to rely on lectures and directives from others, particularly those who have done the same way historically over 500 years, and allowing our situation to be inferior to everybody else. I think it's important that Africa takes its own charge.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so, as we prepare to finish, I welcome you.
Dr. Rioba, I would like to come in on a point which my brother Roy touched and
Dr. Kazioba.
Dr. Kazioba touched as well, particularly on the aspect of the lockdowns.
Yeah.
And Dr. Kazioba actually put it very interestingly when he says that a lot of what President Magufuli has put forward, he has been vindicated 2 weeks later. In actual fact, Kenyan Wall Street has vindicated President Magufuli by saying that in their latest report, that the Tanzanian economy saw the fastest growth in Africa in 2020. So it shows that the position against locking down actually was of an economic benefit to Tanzania. So Tanzania actually took the right decision by not locking down because the economy improved. So necessarily it means that it facilitated a way by which to make the condition better for the people. And that in itself is very much in keeping with some of the international studies that are being done currently, which are proving that the biggest beneficiaries of the lockdowns were the rich. That the poor were basically totally victimized. And I remember when we were watching on TV, President Magufuli articulating a position that says that the people of Tanzania will not be able to survive a lockdown. And we have neighboring countries that are landlocked who will not be able to survive if we close down Tanzania because they won't have any access. So now here it is. Kenyan Wall Street actually issued a report which says that the Tanzanian economy grew the fastest in Africa in 2020. Whereas other economies are talking about how they plummeted, Tanzania went up. So should we not therefore be acknowledging the good that has come out of President Magufuli's policies? Because it would be wrong for us to pretend we do not know when we know. And we cannot be seen to be praise singing where President Magufuli is not doing the right thing. But he is doing the right thing, that's why we are praising him. He is doing the right thing, that is why we are saying from a pan-Africanist perspective, what are the lessons to be learned from Tanzania? How do we consolidate the position of Tanzania for the benefit of the global African nation? Because what is happening here is actually a stepping stone to the greatness of Africa.
Sabelo, that's actually my last question to you. You have put it very well. Yeah. My question is, how do we replicate what President Magufuli has been doing here consistently, by the way? Yes. And he has drawn a lot of attention globally, both negative and positive. Yes. And we appreciate the positive response from you, and I'm sure there are other people in South Africa, as we have seen in other countries in Africa and elsewhere, who actually support the position. So let's get the lessons. How can this be replicated to the rest of the global African people of African descent?
The best way to replicate right now is basically for those of us who are in a position to implement whatever we can within our own spaces. The biggest difficulty that we have is that we don't have other African governments who are prepared to stand strong and support President Magufuli. So you find that the lessons, in as much as they are at a governmental level and should be pushed by governments in Africa, that is not happening. But what we are learning and what we have to learn is that we as African people are capable of standing strong, maintaining our own position, and therefore preparing ourselves for a future which we can truly call African. By looking at institutions, whether these institutions are governmental or non-governmental institutions, we have to begin now to actually get the lessons of what President Magufuli is doing. We have to come to a point where we don't just see it as something happening in Tanzania. We look at it and say, like I was breaking it down earlier, where there is the education, there is the agriculture, there is the health. Just basically break it down and say, okay, from a holistic sort of perspective, where is this taking us? Because again, I was saying earlier to someone that what I find very, very interesting is how even when President Magufuli addresses the nation, he speaks in Kiswahili. He speaks the language of the ordinary person so that he can be understood at that level. Because you find that lack of access is not purely about maybe not being able to read and write. It's about how the communication is basically done as well. I can get up and speak in English, break it down to a level where even the youngest child can understand. But I can get up again and speak English and use courtroom language, of which no one will understand anymore.
Absolutely.
So I've basically
only the
shut out.
Brothers.
Only this is the thing. But President Magufuli is making himself accessible to the people, and that is part of what we are saying as Pan-Africanists. And some of us have come to a point where we are saying Kiswahili is one of the widest spoken languages on the continent. So why don't we all learn it and begin to actually speak in an African language? It's disheartening to be sitting here and speaking in English, whilst I know that the bulk of the audience in Tanzania are people who speak Kiswahili and who will not be able to understand what I'm saying because the language is totally foreign to what they understand. So that's another lesson that is very, very important, our communication. So we need to now start breaking down what exactly this communication is about, which is the institution building, which is where we are also now saying the lessons that we learn. I love the way President Magufuli is also encouraging the youth to get involved in the building of Tanzania. He is encouraging the youth to be part of the solution to the problems that Tanzania finds itself confronted with. And he is saying, don't sit there and just complain on the side. Don't sit there and wait that maybe someone is going to make it right. Come, be part of the solution. So that again is another opportunity to begin to build institutions around our youth, where we begin to have our own leadership training methodologies, which now, as we bring this leadership training, we bring it from a perspective that is African-centered. We are not taking Western models and saying we are training leaders. We are not inviting NGOs from the West and say, come and train our people, come and teach them democracy. We are saying we have our own systems of governance as African people. We have our own structures. Youths, let's sit down and dissect this thing. How do we begin now to structure a scenario that will give us a solid African position, so that when you come into power, you are actually coming into power standing on a solid foundation. Because the presidents that we have right now, they get into power standing on a colonial foundation. And we cannot expect them to give us anything different from what coloniality expected of them, because their foundation is coloniality. Whereas if we now begin to structure a scenario where we say, okay, to our young people, let's develop a foundation upon which they will stand going up. And the other lesson is basically, how do we then bring the global African nation into context? Because one of the things that we are lacking as African people is our understanding of nationhood. During the days when we were fighting for independence right across the continent, yes, there was the spirit of nationalism, but the nationalism was defined according to the French origination of the concept of nation. And now we are saying, no, we cannot define ourselves according to that. We define ourselves according to what an African nation is, where by virtue of the fact that I'm an African, I am no different from a Tanzanian. Tanzanian just happens to be another label.
A creation.
Yes, it's a creation, which does not speak to the reality of who we are as a people.
And West is still a creation of someone, and I'm not trying to say this in a bad way, but this is the truth. A creation of somebody who subjugated you, somebody who thought you were an inferior creature. So you hang on to it, and you think that defines you.
Yes, that is true. That ends up being the identity.
Roy, what is your take? Our time is running out.
The international community in its totality, has been greatly been misled, both by the opposition faction in Tanzania and other misguided African officials here and there. When coronavirus broke, the outbreak broke, we had President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa. He said, the virus is here, go lockdown. When it broke down off in America, President Trump said, we have it here, but it's a passing flu. While in Tanzania, when it came, President Magufuli said this, we have a situation. Please follow the medical instructions given by the Ministry of Health. President Magufuli, go through his speeches, he has never refuted the presence of this virus. Absolutely. He knows it's there. He knows. President Magufuli has never referred coronavirus as a passing flu, like the way President Trump or Bolsonaro or Zelensky did. Now, there's something. President Magufuli has not refused, objected, or turned down the offer of Tanzanians being vaccinated. But how do you allow your citizens to be vaccinated in a situation whereby the Sputnik vaccine V from Russia, the Americans are saying that it has skipped 4 important clinical stages. The Chinese one has skipped.
Of course, those are nemesis. So you never know why. So we cannot probably take that forward.
I know what President Magufuli is standing for is in good faith. Exactly as what your CJ is standing for in South Africa. The situation is that there are other African leaders who want to go this way, but they are afraid.
And that's exactly what I wanted us to explore because that was the question I put forward to my brother here, that how can we replicate? In fact, it's the questioning, that's what I emphasize, the questioning, the critical intervention in the whole affair, which actually should be replicated in other areas of cooperation with others, that we don't become passive partners in every intervention or every engagement there is out there.
Africa is where all important natural resources are.
Absolutely.
But you can wonder, why are we not united? Why don't we stand with one voice? Yeah. There's a problem somewhere. What I'm trying to say is, President Magufuli has shown the way. And he anticipated a backlash, an attack from the West. And of course it has come. Yeah. I was shocked that a certain misguided opposition official here in this country was yesterday saying, some days ago, that if he's not going to allow vaccination, we are going to call the ICC, international. Now, you see, this is an entity heading a political party. He does not understand as how the Rome Statute is supposed to apply in legal issues. Now, this is a problem. The problem is that we are almost turning. Majority of African leaders are mere bootlickers, sycophants of the West. They believe that
you're using very strong English words. Please proceed. We have run out of time, and
this is a problem. They know that maybe from where they're standing, they know that this is an issue, because these leaders are watching televisions of other stations worldwide, CNN, Fox. The people are saying this is a Bill Gates virus. I think you have heard a lot, and they're saying. But nobody is prepared to say that before we go to masks, lockdown, and vaccination, this is what Africa wants. Absolutely. Take our CDC official from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, to where the virus originated in Wuhan. Let them conduct an impartial investigation so that we see if it's related to SARS. There's a certain French virologist who also discovered the presence of HIV, claiming that there's an aspect of malaria and HIV in between that virus.
There's a lot of confusion. That now, for anyone who wants to conclude that here is the scientific remedy, no, you have to question.
The situation is President Magufuli leads, others will follow.
Thank you.
I hope that will happen, because that's actually what we want to happen, for others to follow the example of President Magufuli. But the issue of asking questions, it is like those who have colonized us, they never wanted us to ask the right questions. And they still don't want us to ask the right questions. And that's why President Magufuli gets into trouble all the time. He says something, they have to say something, they have to misquote him, they have to, distort whatever he is trying to put forward. So
in order to perpetuate a particular narrative.
Exactly, a narrative that they have been perpetuating all the time. Yeah. So some president has come now, President Magufuli, and he's like exposing, the lies that have been hidden for years. And of course they don't like, because he's becoming a threat, according to the quotation you've read. When someone can articulate their situation, they are a victim.
You cease to become a victim.
They cease to become a victim,
they
become a threat. Yeah. So he's becoming a threat to the designers of colonialism.
Exactly.
And therefore, that's why in the beginning I said these people are still around. The colonizers, they are working through remote control. And most of the African leaders, are being used like
Professor,
remote
that's controls. Exactly the reason.
But this one has refused to be a remote control of the West.
Exactly, that's the
reason. And that is why every time all the negative publicity has to be. The unfortunate thing is that even Tanzanians, we have got into that situation of, it is sad. I think we shouldn't get into the position of the West, because we say this is a struggle. And as a country, as a continent, we need to stick together. We need to work together, right? And if there are people working against us in the West or wherever in the world, they should not come from within.
From
This
within
is
the
the
country.
most sad
Yeah.
part of the story.
Yeah.
These people, I mean, our fellow Tanzanians, our fellow Africans, like advocate. Advocate, sorry, it's okay.
No problem.
Advocate Sabelo Sibanda,
Yes.
come up and articulate clearly that this is the way to go for African leaders.
Professor, thank you very much. Unfortunately, time is not our best ally. I just wanted, on a note, you finished your contribution to read another of Baldwin's quotation, where he says, "There are people in the world for whom coming along is a perpetual process. People who are destined never to arrive." So if we Africans keep coming along, you are simply coming along as an appendage of something else, you will never arrive.
True.
And I know tomorrow we are going to have another event where you will be speaking, and fortunately tomorrow you'll have more time.
That's good.
We thank you very much for coming. Roy, as always, fantastic. Thank you very much for coming and for your contributions. Professor, as always, thank you very much for your contribution. Dear viewers, here we come to the end of our special program today, where we had 4 panelists. One of them is in the other studio, and I'll mention their name once again. We had Roy Sarungi, whom you all know, or many of you know, who has been participating in our discussion programs. He's a very good analyst of ours. And we also have a professor to my left here, Professor Martha Koro, who is also a Pan-Africanist and a strong advocate of Kiswahili language. We had also a guest from South Africa, Advocate Sabelo Sibanda. He's a lawyer, and he's been here in Tanzania, observing how Tanzania reacts or conducts its affairs in the context of Pan-Africanism. And this is because Advocate Sabelo is himself a Pan-Africanist. Very few Pan-Africanists in Africa, but I'm sure the number will grow. But we also have Dr. Paul Kaziobia, who is in studio number 2. I thank you very much for participating. It's your second time to participate in our discussion programs, and I hope it won't be the last. My last words to viewers is that what we are discussing here, we are actually not trying to portray anyone as an enemy. What we are stating are facts, historical facts, and what is going on today, that any human being worth of the title a human being must be intelligent enough to recognize the circumstances, historical circumstances, and contemporary circumstances in which they live. If they can't determine their own future, then they are doomed. And you remember, for those who have watched our Kiswahili program, Mizani, we discussed Charles Darwin's theory, survival of the fittest. If you allow yourself to be the weaker species, you will be trampled upon and left there to dry in the sun. I thank you very much for following us up. My name is Ayubu Rioba, and continue watching our forthcoming programs.